Hey there, welcome back to the channel. I've got so much behind the scenes Commander data to share with you today, but before I can get into it, I have to acknowledge something. This card, named Manhole Missile. Manhole Missile. Crazy to see my college nickname wind up on a Magic card. Okay, I kid, but also not really, because my DMs have not been okay ever since this card came out, y'all. I'm getting tagged in posts left and right, recurring jokes about the ex-boyfriend island, all that jazz. I mean, I guess, hey, you know what? I'm glad that the brand remains strong. Anyway, we got some data to get to today. So if you were to ask a Commander player which color they think is the strongest color in EDH, which one do you think they would say? Blue? Green? It's usually a toss-up of one of those, right? At EDH Rec, we've been surveying general sentiment and chatter that we see online, as well as anecdotal conversations at game stores or at various game nights. And in addition, I also ask for responses from patrons from this channel's exclusive Discord, patreon.com/EDHRecast, plug, for their answers to the following 3 questions. 1. Which color do you think is the most powerful in EDH? 2. Which color do you think is the most popular in EDH? And 3. Which color combination do you think is the most popular in EDH? I'm going to show you some responses and then show you some actual data, but real quick, just lock in your guesses. Say them out loud maybe, that way you're really sure which ones you're going with. I collected a small sample of responses from patrons, which I'll show on screen now, but to sum them up, for question 1, usually either blue or green seemed to be perceived as the most powerful color. Blue because of its potency in the competitive sphere, being able to interact on the stack and things like that, and green because of its consistency and versatility in more casual and social games of Commander. For question 2, which color is the most popular, green was easily the most common response. Reasons stated including green being a great gateway color, or it having big beefy creatures, lots of reliable effects like being able to deal with many different types of problems on a board, especially at the social levels of gameplay. And for question 3, often Simic or her assorted sisters like Bant or Sultai were named as the most popular guess. Again, I think these are super fair responses. I think these estimates are very well reasoned, and I also think that they are reflective of a sentiment that a lot of players out there share. While I've shown just a few screenshots from the Discord, my general impression, just being a citizen of the Magic the Gathering internet, is that these responses would line up with many other people's anecdotal experiences around game night and at game stores and things like that. But if some of those were your guesses, what if I told you you're probably wrong? Allow me to show you this. This is a graph of data we've accumulated at EDH Rec to track the most popular colors present in each deck across the past 2 years of deck data. And as you may notice, out of the 5 possible spots, green is in 4th place. And if you guessed that the most popular color combination was Simic or Bant or Sultai, well, spoiler warning, but Simic is the 11th most popular color combo, and Sultai and Bant are even lower. I'll get to that graph in greater detail later on, but for now, let's analyze that first chart. This video will also be going out in a podcast feed, so some folks will be listening to audio only. I'll of course do my best to convey this very visual information to you so that you can listen and still follow along, but I definitely recommend giving the video version a look because these graphs are fascinating. Suffice it to say, here, all 5 colors are hovering around the 50% mark. The final rankings as of today are as follows. Black is actually the most popular color, showing up in about 53% of decks, and red is actually the next most represented, with blue very close behind it, both just slightly above 50%. Then we have green barely holding on to the 48% threshold, and white showing up at just about 47%. Note that this is not just a recent fluke. It's not like green was high for a very long time and then has temporarily swung down. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. We can actually see that it has been consistently very low throughout the entire timeline of the graph, and is in fact currently in an upswing after the release of Lorwyn Eclipsed. Some colors like black have been staying more consistently high up in the graph, but green and white are very regularly beneath the 50% mark. Around the time of Final Fantasy, for instance, green was showing up in less than 44% of decks out there. Now, we're just talking about the popularity question right now, not the power question, but I bet a lot of people out there will be very surprised to see this data, given how often it is assumed that green is the most popular color. Now, an important caveat belongs here. This is the number of decks that include these colors, but as we've seen before, just because a deck includes a color does not mean that that color is evenly distributed throughout the 99. I'll refer you to this prior video about Commander color distribution, linked in the description. In that data, we saw that, for instance, decks including red often only have like a splashy splash of red, rather than having a similar number of, say, red and black cards, or red and blue cards, or what have you. And meanwhile, decks that include green tend to be pretty overwhelmingly green. That is some older data though, so if you'd like an updated report on color distribution to see whether or not that idea still holds up today, sound off in the comments. And of course, like or subscribe while you're there. There's so much more data where that came from that I can't wait to show you, so yeah, you don't want to miss all that. The point is, even though green may show up in fewer decks overall in the format, when it is in the deck, there's pretty good reason to believe that it is a big presence within that deck. And color distribution and density within a deck is likely one of the things that leads to the community perception and assumptions of green's popularity. And I'll touch more on that in a moment when discussing the most powerful color, again a little bit later on in this video. In fact, I'm going to show you even more about the specific reasons why this data is waxing and waning in the ways that it does and why it looks that way on the graph, but since I am already paused right here, please help me give a brief shout out to this channel's sponsors. First, Dragon Shield. Dragon Shield has been me and my family's go-to sleeves for years now. I am a mash shuffler, which means I need a sturdy sleeve, and they have exactly what I need. Sleeves so good and so durable that they even sent them to space and back. And they've got a line of guild sleeves coming out that I cannot wait to get my hands on, plus sleeves with officially licensed Secret Lair fetchland art from Wizards of the Coast, which is gorgeous. If you order from their store, use code EDHREC for a discount. Again, that's code EDHREC, all lowercase, for a discount on Dragon Shield's superb sleeves. And one other fun announcement, this week on the 18th of March, we're officially releasing the Space Cow Media merch store at shop.spacecowmedia.com. We've teamed up with places like Archidect, Cardsphere, just a bunch of awesome deck building websites so that you can get cool stuff from cool places. EDH Rec mugs, Archidect hats, YouTube channel tees and hoodies, water bottles, peas, greens, potatoes, tomatoes. This is something my colleague Matt has put a whole lot of effort into, so I hope you'll check it out. Go to shop.spacecowmedia.com. Now, back to the data. Looking at this graph in more detail, it's kind of astonishing to watch the swells and waxes and wanes of each color over the years. For instance, green and black just saw a surge upward with the release of Lorwyn Eclipsed, undoubtedly because black and green elves made a stunning return, and that has long been a beloved archetype. We'll see if that surge holds, or whether things dip back down again after the initial excitement of the set passes. Green saw its lowest dip around the time of Final Fantasy, which feels like a surprise at first, until you look back at that set and realize that the most popular commanders that were spurring on a brewing frenzy at that time were Y'shtola, Vivi, Kefka, and Sephiroth. And I do mean brewing frenzy. Y'shtola is already the number 5 most popular commander from the past 2 years. Like, she's poised to potentially eclipse Krenko Mob Boss, and that never happens. So yeah, even though green had seen a swell during Tarkir Dragonstorm just 2 months before then, it turns out that all of the new deck building energy around that time suddenly flowed towards those famous mages and villains from Final Fantasy, which really knocked the wind right out of green's sails there. How about the other colors here? Well, I mentioned that black recently saw a swell upwards when Lorwyn Eclipsed came out, but it also saw enormous surges upward around the times of Duskmourn, and, funny enough, at the release of Tarkir Dragonstorm. Duskmourn totally tracks. The horror set feels very black, and the 2 standout cards from that set are Valgavoth, who has over 24,000 decks, and Withering Torment, which shot immediately up to nearly an 8% inclusion rate in all decks that it was eligible to go into. I know 8% doesn't sound like a lot, but as a point of comparison, that is a higher play rate than Phyrexian Metamorph or Craterhoof Behemoth. I mentioned it was slightly odd to see black and red's surge and growth around the time of Tarkir Dragonstorm, and that's because that's a 3-color set, so you'd expect to see movements have more connectivity within the 3-color wedges that are represented in that set. In a set that is focused on 3-color combinations, such as Mardu, it's weird to see black and red go up, but for white not to go up, you know what I mean? Teval and Zurgo came out at that time, and they both got very popular, especially Teval, but surely those commanders can't be the entire explanation. And it turns out, no, it's not. It looks odd until you remember that April was also the release of the Deadpool April Pools Secret Lair, which not only contained a bunch of powerful reprints, Deadly Rollick and all that, but Deadpool is also the most popular Secret Lair original commander right now. So almost certainly that Secret Lair release contributed to the brief spike that we see for those colors at that time. What's really remarkable about this graph is the relative stability of red and blue over the entire timeline here. While black swung from 47.5% all the way to nearly 55%, blue barely varied at all, minorly wavering continually around 49% and 51% on average. Even with the release of the Tevals and Y'shtolas and Bumbleflowers of the world, blue stayed the course very steadily. Honestly, red did too, although it got a few more fleeting spikes up here and there, such such as around the Tarkir Dragonstorm set, dragon set doing dragon things, a classic red domain, and also around the Avatar set, almost certainly because of all of the firebending cards. The top 6 commanders from Avatar all include red, and 4 of them have firebending, so a really good showing for that color there. Finally, the graph also shows us how white has had a steady rise over the past 2 years, having had its lowest points around the times of Outlaws at Thunder Junction, a villain-focused set, so kind of fair that white would have less to do around there, and around Magic Foundations, although again, in fairness, that was a low point for several other colors too. Around the time of Aetherdrift though, white started to pick itself back up and gather a little steam again. I think it benefited a lot from having a couple of good releases in a row, like Mendicant and Hashiton from Aetherdrift, then the cards Elspeth and Voice of Victory from Tarkir, and then Ishtola from Final Fantasy. I think all of those in a row helped white get its game face on just a little bit better. However, it is still ultimately ending this graph in last place. It almost had 4th place, but as I mentioned, Lorwyn swung green back up out of last place at the very last second, ultimately getting us back to where we began, with green ending at 4th. What I think is especially revealing about this data is the way that the cards that go into the 99 impact popularity too. While something like Withering Torment might have helped to make moves for black around the time of Duskmourn, popular and powerhouse cards like Icetill Explorer and Terra Symbiosis did not make as big of a move for green around the time of Edge of Eternities. I think this may indicate that novelty plays the biggest role for the cards in the 99's effect on popularity. Icetill Explorer and Terra Symbiosis are incredibly powerful cards, but we also already know which decks they're going to go into. Meanwhile, a Withering Torment is a slightly new direction for black card design that perhaps encouraged more testing at that time to find out what its best new home would end up being. At this time, though, that's just speculation on my part. But that's just the most popular color. What about the most popular color combination? Let's get to that graph now. There are 32 possible color combo options from 0 and monocolor all the way to 5 color. And a lot of players guessed that Simic or Sultai or Bant, that type of green and blue family, would be the most popular ones, right? Well, remember what I showed you earlier, Simic is nowhere close to the top. It's actually 11th, and Sultai and Bant are 15th and 19th, respectively. The actual answer of which color combination is the most popular is this. In order, we see that 5 color decks are at the top spot, making up over 6.5% of the format overall. Think Joda, Kenrith, the Ur-Dragon. There are actually 5 color commanders that each have over 22,000 decks to their name, and even the next 5 aren't all that far behind them. Turns out there's a lot to play around with when you're using all 5 colors. The second place color combination is Grixis, repping a little over 4.5% of decks out there. Sauron, Nekusar, Azula, almost any compelling villain really, this tends to be where they go. And Wizards has made those villain cards pretty darn spicy, which clearly attracted quite a lot of interest. Then, in third place, also above 4% of the format, we got Golgari. In past Data Dive episodes, we've actually seen that Golgari and Izzet pretty regularly alternate as the top 2 color combos, so longtime viewers may have seen that one coming. Alright, I'll briefly round out the rest of the results here. 4th through 8th place, all at just above 4% representation in the format, is Esper, Naya, Rakdos, Dimir, and Mardu. Then, at just barely a hair under 4%, 9th place is Izzet, and right after it in the 10th spot is Mono Black, our first monocolor entry. The percentages start to take some bigger steps down from here. 11th is Simic, as we saw earlier, and 12th through 20th place is Gruul, Mono Red, Orzhov, Sultai, then Boros, plot twist, I bet a lot of you didn't expect Boros to be right next to Sultai, and then Jeskai, Temur, Bant, and then my mom's favorite color combo, Azorius. And side note, please no one tell her that. She has 2 Azorius decks and she's working on a 3rd. I think that this would break her heart to find out that her favorite color combination is in 20th place. So I'm trusting all of you, okay? Don't tell mom. Alright, mono green is down at spot 21, the last color combination above the 3% mark. Selesnya, mono blue, Jund, Mono White, and Abzan are all below 3%. Some of them honestly closer to 2.5%. But after that, it is a huge step down. Every single 4-color combination shows less than 1%. And in fact, the Atraxa color combination is the only one that even manages to get above the popularity of colorless decks. It goes Atraxa color combo, then colorless decks, then the Omnath of Creation or Kineos and Tiro colors, and with less than 0.5% each, we round out with the Breya color combo, the Yidris color combo, and in dead last, the Saskia color combo. Kind of an informal way to refer to each of those, but I know that was just a whole lot of information all at once, so I hope that that helped to follow things along. So, okay, I probably titled this video something like "You're wrong about green" or some such, and now that we've seen all of this data, I think it's time for us to return to those original questions that I asked at the top of the video. What's the most popular color? Well, a lot of people thought that it might be green, but it's actually black, and green was in 4th place. What's the most popular color combination? A lot of people expected that it might be Simic, but that was actually 11th, and the real answer was a combination of all 5 colors, although Grixis and Golgari were in 2nd and 3rd place. But what about that other question? Which color is the most powerful? I had data about the other 2 questions, so do I have data about this one, about the most powerful color? No, obviously I don't. That's not really the kind of thing that deck building websites can currently track. But I do think it's interesting that because blue and green are most often perceived to be the most powerful, and with good reason, mind you, I'm not criticizing those guesses at all. Because blue and green are most commonly perceived as the most powerful, we as players tend to naturally assume that they are also therefore the most popular. One perception kind of feeds into another perception. Popularity is not the same thing as power, although they will influence each other. We as players just need to be mindful of how we may marry those 2 things together in our brains by accident. If I went with the title, "You're wrong about green in Commander" or something like that, I mean, I admit that's a little attention grabbing, and yeah, I haven't done anything in this video to disprove the notion that green might be the most powerful color in Commander, an assertion that we just hear a lot out there on the Magic internet. And I wasn't trying to say that anyone is wrong about green's power level, not really. What I'm actually trying to say is that you may be right about one thing, but being right about one thing sometimes may cause you to become wrong about another thing. Like, you may be correct that green is the most powerful in Commander, but is that notion literally coloring your perception of how often you're actually seeing it? This is the classic frequency illusion, which, to literally just use the Wikipedia description, is a cognitive bias in which a person notices a specific concept, word, or product more frequently after recently becoming aware of it. Like when you buy a red car and then suddenly you start to notice red cars all over the place. That seems to also be the case here, at least just a little bit, right? Selective attention subconsciously filters what we focus on and what we then end up thinking about. If you want my take, I do place blue at the top of the power spectrum personally. I certainly don't think of green as any slouch in Commander, but when it comes to green, I think green is the most obvious about when it's powerful. Whereas a color like black sometimes just tends to be more subtle about the ways that it could wreck your face, green is not so subtle. Green is the color of having everything all on board. There's the giant creature, here's a ton of mana, that's a big ol' combat step. Things that at the end of the game strike a more emotionally resonant tone because those things aren't just good, they're also brazen about the ways that they are good. Whereas another color might sometimes perform well but just feel less, I don't know, obnoxious about it? Is that the right word? As I mentioned before, we've seen in the past that decks that include green often include a lot of green cards when they do, not just a little splash of green, which is a strong argument in favor of the idea that green is indeed super powerful after all. But the point I'm trying to make here is that green makes us more aware of itself during games, which means that we are predisposed to then pay more attention to it, and that is what begins to shape our perception. These data do not prove nor disprove whether green is the most powerful color in EDH, but I do think that they represent an important step in helping us to understand power in the first place. This popularity data is going to come as a surprise to a lot of folks out there, and surprises force us to reckon with our cognitive biases, and moments like that help us to shake up our expectations and to recalibrate a little bit, and that is exactly the process by which you will level up as a player. In other words, if I may get a little bit more informal here for a moment, you know that meme about bitch eating crackers? Where if you kind of just don't like somebody, then no matter what that person does, even if it's literally just them sitting there eating crackers, it still kind of annoys you? Make sure you're not approaching green in that way, or any color in that way, really. Like, understand the parts where that thing is super good, for sure. But also understand the stuff that it's not doing too. Because if you don't recalibrate for that, then that could distract you from all of those Grixis players or those mono black players like me who are pretty happy to find out that you're not paying as much attention to us as you probably should be. To sum up, you might not be wrong about green after all, but because you're not wrong about green, that might mean that in this other way, you are wrong about green. Gotta watch out for that. An enormous thank you to Julia Maddalena for her work on putting together all of this behind the scenes data, and who you may remember from a previous interview about upgrades she helped to make to EDH Rec, or you may know her from her Fire and Ice articles. She's an absolute wizard, the Duchess of Data, and thank you so much, Julia, for your amazing work. In fact, we've got a lot more where this came from, y'all. Like, this type of project is what EDH Rec is all about, and it is beyond fun to present to you all of this information in what we all hope is a cool, easy to follow, and efficient way. I'm really, really excited to show you even more stuff like this to help you level up your understanding of the game, because, that's how we become better players and better players with each other. So gear up, get hyped, because we've got a lot more to show you coming up here soon. I'd like to close out this little episode with a Patreon shout out. Lucas Kruzalak, thank you so much for supporting the channel. You're the best. Support like yours helps creators to get to keep doing what they do, so thank you. And I also thought it would be kind of fun to end this with a little challenge to stats too. You know how Hank Green does connections at the end of his videos? I kind of want to get that vibe here, so let's go. From the Patreon Discord, Mr. Necromancer pointed out a card that he thought was overplayed in Auntie Ool decks. Auntie Ool is the Jund -1 counter commander, giving you benefits whenever you minus up your own creatures and pinging your opponents when you shrink theirs. And Mr. Necromancer submitted that the card Crumbling Ashes is showing up in more Auntie Ool decks than may actually be necessary. At the time that he wrote in, it was showing up in 3,000 out of 9,000 Auntie Ool decks, although the numbers have shifted around a little bit in the time since then. Crumbling Ashes is a 2-mana black enchantment that says, at the beginning of your upkeep, destroy target creature with a -1 counter on it. And Mr. Necromancer says that this might not actually be all that necessary for this deck, which I really hope is true, because holy crap, this card spiked up to like over $40. What he points out is that Auntie Ool decks kind of rely upon your opponents having creatures in play. You kind of need them to have stuff lying around for you to be able to shrink and to put counters on, and killing those things early with Crumbling Ashes might actually rob you of the chance to squeeze every last drop of value out of your opponent's creatures. Just think of how many Auntie Ool and Hapatra triggers you end up missing out on, right? But also, the Crumbling Ashes ability isn't optional. If your opponents have no creatures in play, but you have a creature with a -1 counter on it, you must destroy target creature with a -1 counter on it, even if that creature is yours. That could be a bit of a backfire if it comes up. I think this is a fascinating challenge. Like, if you've already spent the money getting this card, I sure hope that you're navigating it as carefully as it turns out that you need to. But I also think it's pretty cool to point out that there are plenty of good reasons not to need such an expensive card in a deck like this too. Any Auntie Ool players out there want to weigh in? Let us know what you think. Thanks again to Julia for the data, to Lucas Kruzalak for being a patron, to Dragon Shield for sponsoring the channel, and of course to you for watching. And as always, remember, EDH wreck your deck before you wreck your deck.